Hello! Welcome. Welcome. Sunday night, Monday morning, Monday afternoon. It's a time zone for you.
12 hours before the wedding, her maid of honor sent me one photo, her, in a hotel bed, with someone who wasn't me. I printed it, folded it into the ring box, and waited. The message arrived at 11:47 p.m., exactly 12 hours before I was supposed to become a married man. The sender was Grace, my fiancée's maid of honor, and the attachment contained a single photograph that would unravel 3 years of my life in the span of a heartbeat. The hotel room was unmistakably the Grandview Plaza downtown. The same hotel where we had booked our wedding reception. The same hotel where Natasha had supposedly gone for her bachelorette party spa treatment earlier that evening. The timestamp on the photo showed 9:23 p.m., roughly 2 hours before Grace sent it to me. What struck me first wasn't the naked figures intertwined on the Egyptian cotton sheets, but the deliberate positioning of personal items on the nightstand. Natasha's engagement ring sat prominently next to a champagne flute, as if she wanted to make absolutely certain the ring would be visible in any photographs taken. Her silk robe, the one I had bought her for Christmas, hung carelessly from the bedpost like a flag of surrender. The man beneath her was someone I recognized immediately. Dr. Harrison Blackwell, the plastic surgeon who had performed her rhinoplasty 6 months earlier. The same man she had described as professional and boring during her recovery period. The same man whose business card I had found in her purse 3 weeks ago, which she explained away as a follow-up appointment reminder. I studied every pixel of the photograph with the methodical precision of someone examining evidence at a crime scene. The champagne bottle was Cristal, the same brand we had selected for our wedding toast. The hotel room service tray contained remnants of what appeared to be chocolate-covered strawberries and oysters. The curtains were drawn, but a sliver of the city skyline was visible through a gap, confirming both the location and the approximate time frame. Grace's accompanying message was brief and devastating in its simplicity. She had gone to surprise Natasha with late-night wedding preparations when she discovered the door to the bridal suite propped open. Her instinct as a longtime friend had been to document what she found before confronting anyone involved. The photograph had been taken from the doorway, suggesting Grace had not entered the room. The angle captured both faces clearly, eliminating any possibility of mistaken identity or misinterpretation. This was not a moment of passion between strangers or a case of resemblance. This was premeditated betrayal executed with calculated precision. I printed the photograph on the high-resolution printer in my home office, the same printer I had used to create our wedding invitations 8 months earlier. The irony was not lost on me as I watched the image materialize line by line, pixel by pixel, destroying the future I had spent years building. The ring box sat on my desk, velvet and pristine, containing the wedding bands that had cost me 2 months' salary. I folded the photograph carefully, creasing it along the edges until it fit perfectly inside the box, nestled against the gold bands like a snake coiled in paradise. Sleep became impossible after that moment. I spent the remaining hours of the night conducting my own investigation, piecing together fragments of conversations and seemingly innocent encounters that suddenly took on sinister meaning. The late-night consultations about post-surgical care, the unexplained absences during her healing period, the sudden interest in returning to the same medical practice for routine checkups that could have been handled by any physician. My phone buzzed repeatedly with text messages from the wedding coordinator, the caterer, and various members of the wedding party confirming final details for the ceremony. Each notification felt like another nail being driven into the coffin of my former life. Morning arrived with all the ceremony and pageantry that $50,000 worth of wedding planning could orchestrate. The venue buzzed with activity as florists arranged centerpieces and the catering staff prepared for 200 guests who would witness what they believed to be the beginning of a beautiful marriage. I arrived at the church early, ostensibly to help with last-minute preparations, but actually to conduct what had become a full-scale investigation into the woman I thought I knew. The wedding coordinator, a remarkably efficient woman named Beverly, handed me a clipboard with the final timeline and guest seating arrangements. As I reviewed the list, one name caught my attention in a way that made my blood pressure spike dramatically. Dr. Harrison Blackwell was listed among the guests, seated at table 7 with other medical professionals. Natasha had insisted on inviting him, claiming it would be rude not to include the doctor who had given her so much confidence with her new appearance. The pieces of an elaborate puzzle began forming a clear picture in my mind. The wedding invitation had been sent to Blackwell 6 weeks ago, long after their supposed professional relationship should have ended. His presence at our wedding was not a courtesy invitation, but a celebration of his conquest, a front-row seat to watch me pledge my life to a woman who had been sharing her bed with him for months. I excused myself from the pre-ceremony preparations and drove directly to the Grandview Plaza. The desk clerk, a young man who looked like he had been working the night shift for too many consecutive hours, initially resisted my inquiries about room registrations. However, when I explained that I was investigating potential credit card fraud related to my fiancée's account, his attitude shifted dramatically. The records showed that Dr. Blackwell had been maintaining a monthly reservation at the hotel for the past 4 months, always booking the same suite on the same weekend each month. The registration was under his name, but additional key cards had been issued for each stay. The pattern was so consistent it read like a calendar appointment for infidelity. I requested security footage from the previous evening, claiming that my fiancée had reported losing valuable jewelry during her stay. The security supervisor, perhaps motivated by the urgency of a wedding day crisis, agreed to review the relevant recordings with me in his office. The footage was more damning than the photograph Grace had sent. It showed Natasha arriving at the hotel at 7:15 p.m., 45 minutes before her alleged spa appointment was supposed to begin. She moved through the lobby with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where she was going. The elevator footage showed her pressing the button for the penthouse level without hesitation. More devastating was the footage from 6:30 p.m., which showed Dr. Blackwell entering the hotel, carrying a bottle of champagne and a small gift bag. He walked directly to the elevator bank like a man keeping a long-standing appointment. The timestamp confirmed that their meeting was planned and coordinated, not spontaneous or accidental. The security supervisor mentioned, almost casually, that the hotel had experienced several noise complaints from neighboring rooms over the past few months, all related to the same suite during the same weekend time periods. The complaints had been logged but not acted upon, since the guest was a respected physician who had never caused problems during check-in or check-out procedures. I returned to the church with 30 minutes remaining before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. The parking lot was filled with cars belonging to friends and family members who had traveled from across the country to witness what they believed would be the happiest day of my life. Inside the building, the photographer was arranging shots of the bridal party, including Grace, who caught my eye and nodded solemnly. The weight of the ring box in my pocket felt like it contained not just wedding bands and a photograph, but the accumulated evidence of months of deception and betrayal. Every smile from every guest felt like a mockery, every congratulation like a condolence for a death they did not yet know had occurred. The processional music began at exactly 2 p.m., just as we had rehearsed the night before. I took my position at the altar, flanked by my groomsmen, who had spent the morning making jokes about the end of my bachelor days and the beginning of my responsibilities as a married man. The irony of their comments created a bitter taste in my mouth that no amount of water could wash away. Grace walked down the aisle first, her eyes meeting mine with a mixture of sympathy and determination. She had offered, during a brief conversation in the vestibule, to handle the situation discreetly by confronting Natasha privately before the ceremony began. I had declined her offer, explaining that some revelations required a public stage to achieve their full impact. The bridesmaids followed in perfect formation, each carrying bouquets of white roses and baby's breath that had cost $200 per arrangement. They smiled at the assembled guests, completely unaware that they were participating in what would become the most memorable wedding ceremony in the history of our social circle, though not for the reasons anyone expected. When the wedding march began, the congregation rose in unison to witness the bride's entrance. Natasha appeared at the far end of the aisle, radiant in a dress that had required 6 months of alterations and cost more than my first car. Her father, beaming with pride, offered his arm to escort her toward what everyone assumed would be the altar of matrimonial bliss. She walked with the graceful confidence of a woman who believed she had successfully managed to compartmentalize her double life without consequences. Her smile was perfect, her makeup flawless, her hair arranged in the elaborate style we had spent hours discussing with stylists and photographers. She looked like the embodiment of bridal perfection, which made what was about to happen even more dramatically effective. As she reached the midpoint of the aisle, I noticed Dr. Blackwell in the congregation, seated exactly where the seating chart had placed him. He was wearing a navy suit with a silver tie, looking distinguished and professional. When Natasha's eyes swept across the assembled guests, they lingered on his face for just a moment longer than would be considered appropriate for a bride looking at a casual acquaintance. That momentary glance confirmed everything I needed to know about the depth and duration of their relationship. This was not a recent indiscretion or a moment of weakness. This was an ongoing affair conducted with the full knowledge and participation of both parties, hidden behind the facade of medical professionalism and wedding planning stress. The officiant, Reverend Morrison, had known my family for 20 years and had performed the wedding ceremonies for my parents and my older sister. He began the ceremony with traditional words about the sanctity of marriage and the importance of honesty and fidelity in building a life together. Each word felt like a nail being driven into the coffin of the relationship I thought I had been building for 3 years. When Reverend Morrison reached the part of the ceremony where he asked if anyone had reason why this marriage should not proceed, the church fell into the traditional moment of silence. Typically, this pause lasts no more than a few seconds before the ceremony continues with the exchange of vows and rings. Instead of allowing the moment to pass, I reached into my pocket and withdrew the ring box. The congregation assumed I was simply preparing for the ring exchange portion of the ceremony. Natasha smiled at me with what appeared to be genuine love and anticipation, completely unaware that the box contained not just our wedding rings, but evidence that would destroy her carefully constructed facade in front of everyone she cared about. I opened the box slowly, deliberately, allowing the folded photograph to become visible to Natasha before anyone else could see what was happening. Her facial expression changed instantly from bridal bliss to absolute horror as she recognized the image that Grace had captured 12 hours earlier. The transformation was so dramatic and immediate that several guests in the front rows began to murmur among themselves, sensing that something had gone terribly wrong, but not yet understanding what they were witnessing. The silence in the church stretched from seconds into what felt like minutes as Natasha stared at the opened ring box. Her hands began to tremble, causing the bridal bouquet to shake visibly. The white roses, which had appeared so perfect moments earlier, now seemed to mock the purity and innocence that the entire ceremony was supposed to represent. I removed the photograph from the box and unfolded it with deliberate slowness, ensuring that Natasha could see every detail of the image that would end not just our relationship, but her reputation in our entire social circle. Her face drained of color so completely that several guests in the front row began to express concern about her apparent illness. Dr. Blackwell, seated in the congregation, seemed to realize that something catastrophic was occurring. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his professional composure beginning to crack as he observed Natasha's obvious distress and my calm, methodical movements at the altar. Reverend Morrison, confused by the delay and the bride's apparent medical emergency, asked if we needed to pause the ceremony. His question created the perfect opening for what had become not just a wedding ceremony, but a public trial with 200 witnesses in attendance. I turned to face the congregation, still holding the photograph, and began to speak in a voice that carried clearly to every corner of the church. I explained that marriage was indeed a sacred institution built on trust, honesty, and fidelity. I described how I had discovered, exactly 12 hours earlier, that the woman I was about to marry had been conducting a months-long affair with one of our wedding guests. The reaction was immediate and electric. Gasps echoed through the church as guests turned to look at each other, trying to process what they were hearing. Several people stood up to get a better view of what was happening at the altar. The photographer, initially confused about whether to continue documenting the ceremony, began taking pictures with renewed intensity as he realized he was witnessing something unprecedented. I held up the photograph, describing in clinical detail what it depicted and when it had been taken. I explained the hotel room, the timing, the evidence of premeditation, and the cruel irony that the affair had been conducted in the same location where we were supposed to celebrate our marriage reception in just a few hours. Natasha finally found her voice, but instead of offering denials or explanations, she began making desperate attempts to grab the photograph from my hands. Her desperation only served to confirm the accuracy of my accusations in the minds of everyone present. The struggle caused her carefully arranged hair to come undone and her makeup to smear, transforming her from a radiant bride into a desperate woman whose secrets had been exposed. Dr. Blackwell stood up abruptly and began moving toward the exit, clearly hoping to escape before being identified as the other party in the affair. However, I called him by name and described his location in the congregation, ensuring that everyone present would know exactly who had been sharing hotel rooms with my fiancée for the past 4 months. The church erupted into chaos as guests began talking loudly among themselves, some standing to get better views of the drama unfolding at the altar, others pulling out their phones to record what had become the most scandalous event in the history of our community. The bridesmaids stood frozen in shock, still holding their bouquets but no longer smiling. Grace, the maid of honor who had sent me the photograph, stepped forward to support Natasha, who appeared to be on the verge of collapse. However, instead of offering comfort, Grace publicly confirmed that she had discovered the affair and felt obligated to inform me before I made the biggest mistake of my life. Natasha's father, who had been standing proudly beside his daughter moments earlier, demanded to know if the accusations were true. When Natasha could only respond with tears and incoherent protests, his expression changed from confusion to anger to deep disappointment. He removed his arm from hers and stepped away, leaving her standing alone at the altar in front of 200 people who now knew the truth about her double life. The wedding coordinator, Beverly, attempted to restore order by suggesting that everyone move to the reception hall while the immediate family sorted out the situation privately. However, Dr. Blackwell's attempt to leave the church had been blocked by several male guests, including my groomsmen, who demanded that he explain his role in the destruction of the wedding they had traveled across the country to attend. What followed was a complete confession extracted not through violence, but through the overwhelming social pressure of being confronted by an angry crowd of wedding guests who felt personally betrayed by the deception they had unknowingly witnessed for months. Blackwell admitted to the affair, described its duration, and revealed that he and Natasha had been planning to continue their relationship even after the wedding, using his medical practice as a cover for their ongoing meetings. The revelation that the affair was not ending with the marriage but was planned to continue indefinitely created a second wave of shock that rippled through the congregation. This was not a moment of weakness or a last-minute crisis of commitment. This was a calculated plan to use marriage as a cover for infidelity, with me serving as an unwitting accomplice to my own deception. The aftermath of that afternoon destroyed more than just a wedding ceremony. Within hours, videos of the confrontation had been uploaded to social media platforms and shared thousands of times. The story was picked up by local news outlets and eventually featured in national publications as an example of how social media had changed the way personal dramas played out in public spaces. Natasha's medical career suffered irreparable damage when the hospital where she worked as a nurse learned about the affair through news coverage. The hospital's ethics committee determined that her relationship with a physician while engaged to another man violated professional conduct standards. She was terminated within 2 weeks and found it impossible to find employment at other medical facilities in the area. Dr. Blackwell faced investigation by the state medical board for conducting an inappropriate relationship with a patient. While the relationship had begun after her surgical procedure was completed, the board determined that the doctor-patient relationship created an inherent power imbalance that he had exploited. His medical license was suspended for 6 months, and he was required to complete additional training in professional ethics before resuming practice. The financial consequences were immediate and devastating for both parties involved in the affair. The wedding venue, catering services, and various vendors demanded full payment despite the ceremony's cancellation, since the contracts had been signed months earlier. Natasha was responsible for her portion of these costs, which totaled nearly $30,000, while simultaneously facing unemployment and the expense of finding new housing. The social consequences extended far beyond the immediate parties involved. Grace, despite being vindicated in her decision to expose the affair, found her friendships within the social group permanently altered. Some people praised her for preventing me from making a terrible mistake, while others criticized her for choosing public humiliation over private conversation as her method of revelation. The hotel where the affair had been conducted implemented new policies regarding repeat reservations and noise complaints after the story received widespread media attention. The management realized that their failure to address previous complaints had enabled the ongoing deception and made their establishment complicit in the betrayal that had destroyed a wedding and several lives. My own recovery required relocating to a different city and starting over professionally and personally. The notoriety of the wedding disaster made it impossible to maintain normal relationships in the community where everyone knew the details of my public humiliation. While many people sympathized with my situation, the constant attention and discussion made it impossible to move forward with any sense of privacy or dignity. The legal consequences included a lawsuit filed by Dr. Blackwell against several wedding guests who had posted videos of his forced confession on social media platforms. He claimed that the recordings violated his privacy rights and had damaged his professional reputation beyond the scope of his actual misconduct. The lawsuit was ultimately unsuccessful, with the court determining that his participation in a public confrontation had waived his reasonable expectation of privacy. 3 years later, I learned through mutual acquaintances that Natasha and Dr. Blackwell had married in a small, private ceremony with only immediate family members present. Their relationship, which had thrived on deception and secrecy, apparently could not survive the scrutiny and consequences that followed its public exposure. They divorced within 18 months, with both parties citing irreconcilable differences and the stress of ongoing public attention. The photograph that Grace had sent me 12 hours before my wedding ceremony became evidence in multiple legal proceedings, including the medical board investigation, the hospital's internal review, and several civil lawsuits related to the financial damages caused by the wedding's cancellation. What had begun as a single image documenting infidelity became a crucial piece of evidence in a complex web of professional, personal, and legal consequences that affected dozens of people and lasted for years. The ring box, which had served as the container for both wedding bands and the photograph that destroyed the ceremony, remains in my possession as a reminder of how quickly a carefully planned future can collapse when built on deception. The rings were eventually returned to the jeweler for a partial refund, but the box itself has become a symbol of the importance of truth in relationships and the devastating consequences of betrayal. And that's the story. If you're still here, that means you're one of us. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button. I drop new chaos every single day, and trust me, tomorrow's story, it's even worse than this one.